I shit my pants last night. I shit my pants last night. I did. I shit my pants last night. I shit my pants last night. I did. Fucking shit my pants. I had a great meal. Just a great fucking meal. I had to go to the bathroom so bad. I fucking shit my pants. I had a great meal. Just a great fucking meal. I had to go to the bathroom so bad. I fucking shit my pants.
I will continue to bang the drum of Tenchu is awesome and needs to come back until I am physically unable to. Tenchu Wrath of Heaven slaps. And sure, it's not the smoothest experience by modern standards, but I found it to be very much worth the adjustment period. Sneaking up on a patrolling guard and stealth killing him in an over-the-top flashy animation never stopped being satisfying. And call me a simple man, but that's all I really need in a game. What happened to stealth games, by the way? I want some stealth games, damn it. Don't give me that Far Cry, Elder Scrolls, or Last of Us style optional tacked-on stealth. I want that real stuff. Pure, uncut Colombian stealth games, brother. Anyway, Tenchu rules. You should play it. I continued my journey through the Metal Gear series, playing Metal Gear Solid 3 in January. The remake, Metal Gear Solid Delta, released later on in the year, so the version I played for the first time was a PC port of the Master Collection version, which isn't exactly the original version, but it's close enough. From what I'm told, it's the Subsistence version, which is sort of the definitive version of the original Metal Gear Solid 3. I may have disappointed some of you when I said that I found Metal Gear Solid 2 to be a little bit underwhelming gameplay-wise, with a great story, of course, but I didn't exactly have a great time playing it. Especially the goddamn vamp fight. So how did 3 fare in comparison? Well, going in knowing basically nothing about it, except that it was the first one chronologically, and that Big Boss, the man whom Solid Snake, Liquid Snake, and Solidus Snake were cloned from, would be the playable protagonist. I knew that it was the fan favorite of the series, and it's impossible not to see why after playing it myself. I absolutely loved this game. Unlike Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2, I was completely hooked. The gameplay is refined in some very material ways, the story is the best in the series yet, and Big Boss is by far my favorite protagonist of the series. I cannot say enough good things about this game. If you're like me and somehow have missed out on this game, I implore you to play it. It's just completely phenomenal. The boss fights, the stealth, the survival elements, like the stamina management and hunting for food. Even the most common complaint I heard, the healing system, I never found it to be tedious or to drag the game down in any way. I really enjoyed it all the way through, and I just don't have a bad thing to say about this game. Not even a nitpick, really. I was literally, and I do mean literally, laughing in disbelief at the final showdown with Revolver Ocelot. I think it might be one of the coolest things ever put into a video game to this day. All I wanted to do when I finished it was play it again, and now that Delta is out, I might just have to. One of the many short horror games I played this year, but it comes with a pedigree this time. It's made by David Szymanski, the developer of one of my favorite first-person shooters of all time, Dusk. It's very clearly inspired by things like Manhunt and Condemned Criminal Origins, but it's also a semi-prequel to Iron Lung. Spoilers for the David Szymanski cinematic universe, I guess. The atmosphere is perfect, the melee combat is methodical and chunky, the sound design is excellent. It's just a solid experience all the way through. Highly recommend it. A remaster of the original Ninja Gaiden 2, which I sadly never got the opportunity to play. This game has always been one that I've had my eye on, though. Ever since I saw the cover of Game Informer, that picture of Ryu surrounded by the swords, and all the insanely gory screenshots inside. That was the height of cool when I was 14 in 2008. And honestly, it kind of still is now. This game also rules. The 3D Ninja Gaiden games are all brutally difficult, but have such satisfying combat that you can't help but keep playing. The difficulty is toned down significantly though, I'm told. which is not terribly surprising, considering after playing the original Ninja Gaiden 2 Black is considerably easier, but difficult still enough to be satisfying. I know a lot of hardcore fans were disappointed with some aspects of it, but as a first-time player, this game was rad. You guessed it, a short horror game. This time with a unique twist. It's actually about cooking, which honestly was more fun to me than the horror aspect. It has a nice, cozy atmosphere, and as someone who has worked a lot of jobs that required me to be literally alone in the dark, I really enjoyed it. I wish I had more to say about it, but strangely enough, it was one of the games I enjoyed playing most this year. I hope to see more from the developer in the same vein. Maybe a sequel if I can be so bold. Alright, here's where the hot takes start. I thoroughly hated this game. There was absolutely nothing about it that I liked. People have been talking this game up since the original PC release, and I got this game for free with PS Plus before my subscription ran out, and I still felt ripped off. For about half of the games on this list, I reinstalled them to capture footage for this video, but in this game's case, I genuinely couldn't be bothered to play it for even one more minute. So here's some Garry's Mod footage, because it's more entertaining than anything that can be found in this piece of crap of a game. I cannot believe it costs 25 USD for a glorified source mod. I wish I had more interesting things to say about it, but I'm just so baffled that this game sold more than 3 copies. I could go on in an angry video game nerd type fashion about how
you'd rather superglue your asshole shut than play that game.
But I'll just move on. I know it has a lot of fans, but I just found it to be pretentious, tedious, and all around thoroughly unenjoyable. This is another game that didn't quite land for me. Were it not for the mechanic of having to climb up and refill your shovel's battery and empty your inventory of rocks, it would be over in about 5 minutes. You spend all this time digging only for the game to just kind of stop, with no real payoff. I think it was made by a solo dev, so I can't criticize too harshly, but I thought the end was just kind of lame. I'm not really sure why everyone was obsessed with this game for a hot minute. Originally released for the Wii U in 2014, Fatal Frame, or Zero in Japan, may be the most underappreciated of the classic PS2 era survival horror series. The gameplay of the Fatal Frame series is all about exploring spooky old Japanese architecture and solving puzzles. The combat involves taking pictures of ghosts, baiting them to attack you and snapping the photo at the right moment to maximize its effect. In short, it's right up my alley in every way possible. While I still prefer the original PS2 trilogy over the later games, Fatal Frame has yet to disappoint me. These are the kind of games that you turn the lights down and the volume up for. Halo 3. This game genuinely changed my life as a teenager when I played the original 2007 release on the Xbox 360. I made memories that will carry with me for the rest of my life in this game. Many late nights in Forge and custom games, achievement hunting for the katana. It was a time I will always look back on fondly. You might ask, if the multiplayer is what Halo 3 is remembered for, how does the campaign hold up? Well, that's a stupid question. This game is flawless and can never be criticized. The campaign kicks ass and will always do so. I love this game, and you should too if you know what's good for you. I'm not the most hardcore of Dark Souls fans by any stretch. In general, I prefer Bloodborne, but Dark Souls 3 was still quite a good time. It felt smoother gameplay-wise overall. A lot of the jank of the first 2 games has been sanded off, although I still find myself thinking better of Dark Souls 1. It references the first game so heavily that it almost feels like an apology for Dark Souls 2. The animations are smoother, the world is a lot more detailed. It also reuses a lot of landmarks and locations from the first Dark Souls in some interesting ways. In a kind of way, that's my main issue with Dark Souls 3. It feels perfunctory, like, alright fine, we know you didn't like Dark Souls 2, so here's Dark Souls 1 again. Everything is done well, of course, but there's no moment that really came out of left field in it, from Software way. I played it with the Seamless Co-op mod, which I'll have more to say about that later, but I still quite enjoyed the game as a whole. It just felt a little bit too much like the first game without much of a risk being taken. For those of you that have seen some of my old streams or old videos, this might be surprising. I was very harsh in my criticisms of this game for a few years, and I'll tell you exactly why. I'm gonna have to put its fans on blast for a second, but bear with me. People talk about this game in an exceedingly obnoxious way. Every bit of discourse I've seen about Sekiro has been in the same vein. It's about perfection.
It's about razor sharp skill. It's about frame perfect deflex, memorization of attack animations. You have to learn every boss, every enemy, every encounter inside out before you're going to be able to beat this game. People will tell you this with a straight face, not even the slightest hint of irony. Every time I would attempt this game, it would just seem like it was going to take a level of commitment and, let's face it, autism that I do not possess. But all of it, every bit of it, is complete and utter bullshit. Let me tell you what it's really about. Using the right tool for the job and being as aggressive as possible. You don't have to be some kind of gaming god. All you need is persistence and adaptability. Once I realized that, and subsequently that everything I had been told about this game was wrong, it clicked. And then I whooped this game's ass in record time, defeating every optional boss in the game, except the Demon of Hatred, and getting the return ending. It was incredible. This game was an addiction for me. At the end of my playthrough, all I wanted to do was start a new run and play it again. Suddenly, the constant praise it got made complete sense, and I saw this game for the masterpiece that it is. So much so that I would say that I enjoyed this game even more than Dark Souls, and almost as much as Bloodborne. I played this game based on a friend's recommendation. I've been aware of it ever since I read about it in a magazine in 2006 or 2007. I always knew I would get to it someday, since it seemed right up my alley. And now that I finally did, I don't know what took me so long. This game rocks. You've got to have a high tolerance for jank, but it's extraordinarily stylish. It has a great sense of humor. This game made me laugh out loud multiple times.
It's open mic night in hell, old man. Sing all you want down there.
It does get a little tedious in the late game because you're grinding for a whole lot more money, but the payoff is usually worth it. Essentially, it's all about boss fights with preparation in between them. Doing odd jobs and getting upgrades, grinding for money to unlock the next fight, and so on. All in all, it is a great time. I played this last year, so I don't have a whole lot of new things to say about it. Once again, I played it co-op with my brother who knows every inch of Ocarina of Time just like I do. Every run continues to be enjoyable and different, and it just doesn't really get old. And now we're back to short horror games. In this game, you're a bus driver on a cursed route. You'll see all kinds of spooky stuff on the way, and the atmosphere is dummy thick, just the way I like it. It's very short, but very replayable. Apparently, the developer is working on another game, Night Plane, in the same vein, so I'm looking forward to that. The first Outlast game was kind of an obsession of mine when I first played it. I memorized the game all the way through and made countless attempts to finish it on insane difficulty, which adds permadeath. Although I can't recall if I was ever successful. Probably not. Before long, the sequel was announced. This time it was going to take place in the middle of nowhere and feature heavy religious themes. Sign me up, this is going to be great. But at the end of my playthrough in 2017, I thought it was just okay. Not as good as the first, but serviceable. Revisiting it again after 8 years, my opinion of the game hasn't really changed all that much, sad to say. It's competent, gameplay-wise. I liked some of the new mechanics. You can crawl now, you can use a directional mic to hear where distant threats are coming from, you can lock and unlock certain doors and windows. It's a fun game to play, generally. But man, does it not have the sauce the original does. Too many chase sequences that have you running in a straight line and basically can't fail. The story doesn't really come together. It just doesn't do it for me. In fact, I had no idea what actually happened in the story by the end until I read the Murkoff Account comic, which fills in a lot of the blanks. There's kind of two stories being told concurrently, with the protagonist seeing hallucinations from his childhood, which you'd think would add something to the story, reflect something happening in the present, change the course that he takes in some way. No, and no. It just takes random turns to an entirely different environment, really just as an excuse to have more spooky things happen. I haven't played Outlast Trials yet. I've heard it's good, but I hope the series doesn't end with a multiplayer entry, and we get a true Outlast 3 at some point. And it's another short horror game, baby, and a rather unique one. It was made with actual stop-motion photography, Everything you see on screen is a representation of a prop that was physically made for the game. And it rocks, no pun intended. The atmosphere is tense, the sound design is eerie, and the gameplay is intriguing. It's all about a researcher studying an ancient clay figure that's more than meets the eye. Gradually you discover more and more about the figure, researching it in documents and finding things out about it via magnifying glass and other tools you have on your desk. It doesn't take very long to finish, and it's completely free. I highly recommend it. You guessed it, a short horror game. It's similar to Kiosk in that it involves working in customer service solo late at night, which I've also had some experience doing, sad to say. Dealing with weirdos, rude customers, people who are a little too friendly, it's all here. The gameplay itself is simple and satisfying. The horror is effective. I really enjoyed this game. It's also quite cheap, so if you're interested, I recommend checking it out. I play a lot of first-person shooters. In retrospect, it's almost hard to believe that I'd never played Doom all the way through. I've always respected it, but never really got too into it. I've always found the gameplay loop unsatisfying. Wander through identical hallways looking for keys and find the exit. The enemies are just there to get in the way while you wander around, which is of course reductive and not even really that accurate. As I worked my way through it, I began to really appreciate the level design a little bit more with every mission. The functions of each weapon, the purpose every enemy serves in the broader scheme of a well-crafted Doom level, and so on. And I ended up kind of doing a 180 on it by the time I finished it. There are still missions that suck, sure, but largely it's much better than I historically gave it credit for. Doom 2 is tricky to review in a way. On one hand, it introduces several things to the series that became iconic almost instantly. The super shotgun, the archvile, the pain elemental. On the other hand, it's just way too much. Every mission has such a high amount of enemies that I found myself desperate for health and ammo for its entirety. Which, in a vacuum, is a positive, right? If I weren't looking for a challenge, I wouldn't have played it on Ultra Violence. But the map design really exacerbates this problem. The maps are so convoluted and nonsensical by the halfway point. For a first-time playthrough, I had absolutely no idea where the hell I was going most of the time. Often, I realized that there were secret areas that were necessary for progression. I get that Doom 2 was made for people that know Doom 1 inside and out, but I still think the main issue I had with Doom 2 was that everything was turned up to 11, instead of the first game's more deliberate pacing. Still a great game, of course, but I preferred the original. After Doom 1 and 2, where else can I go but complete the original trilogy and play Doom 3 for the first time? To be clear, this is the original release of Doom 3 from 2004, not the reworked BFG edition that was released in 2012. I went in knowing how divisive it was, and how it changed the formula in significant ways. It was more of a horror game, all the things you commonly hear about Doom 3. And I really liked it. It reminded me a lot of Fear, although it predates Fear by a little more than a year. There's a lot of emphasis on darkness and heavily shadowed areas, which I was really into. The shotgun sucks though, just as bad as I heard it did, but that's really my only nitpick with it. It's a good game, even if it doesn't have that Doom feel exactly. Although, I don't really see why it needed fixing with a re-release that changed a lot of things. It was just fine to begin with. Another cult classic that I finally played for the first time this year. And man, what an interesting game. The whole thing feels like you're only seeing a fraction of the story in a very Dark Souls-esque way. Nothing is really spelled out, and the specifics are mostly up to interpretation. I won't get into spoiler territory, but there's a reason fans of this game are notorious for combing through every little detail and writing 500-page theories on what actually happens in it. Although I didn't find the gameplay to be all that great, truth be told. Controlling Wander kind of feels like going for a run in wet jeans. It's just not pleasant. You'd think that fact alone would bring this game down considerably in my estimation. But, you know, it just doesn't somehow. There's more than enough here to compensate for some PS2 jank. It's far more than the sum of its parts. Another game I played based on a recommendation. It's a 3D platformer centered around collecting badges and hats that give you unique abilities. 3D platformers are inevitably compared to Mario games, so I'll just say that I found this game to be more enjoyable than anything Nintendo has done in that space in quite a long time. I don't want to show too much of this game because I don't want to spoil some of the really out there ideas it has. Each level gets more and more unique and creative as the game goes on. It's a little expensive for what it is, but I'd recommend checking it out even so. I talked about this game last year, so I'll keep this one brief too. The short version is, this game is an all-time great. Somehow it manages to fill the enormous shoes of the original PS2 Silent Hill 2. Genuinely one of the best games I've played in years. This playthrough was on New Game Plus with no guns and radio, still working on all those achievements. New Game Plus gets you the chainsaw like in the original, which trivializes combat across the board, killing even the toughest enemies in a swipe or two. Not much to say that I didn't already say last time, but a year removed and 2 playthroughs later, I am no less infatuated with it. I have a lot to say about Five Nights at Freddy's. Too much to fit into a quick 2-minute clip, but I'll try to keep it brief. In isolation, I really like this game. It's the perfect example of low-budget horror done incredibly well. It manages to establish an atmosphere and an intriguing story with very little, leaving it up to the player to figure out almost everything themselves. Now, I know it became this all-encompassing juggernaut. Game theory basically rewrote the entire story, and each successive entry went further and further away from what I believe made Five Nights at Freddy's great. But the first game, on its own, is a pretty damn good horror game, frankly. I find myself strangely fascinated by it, and I have to come back to it every so often. I've played Dark Souls before, but I largely ignored the summoning feature. But the fact that it does exist makes one ponder. Imagine being able to play Dark Souls entirely in a private co-op session with the boys. Well, imagine no more. The Seamless co-op mod is exactly what it sounds like. It's not the smoothest experience, but it's very impressive how little you actually have to do to get a game going. Especially for 3 friends that live quite far apart. Plenty of shenanigans were had and much foolishness ensued. Jerking on that wiener. Each of us chose a completely different build, and we were able to share items and upgrade materials quite easily. It's a great time. I've played this game dozens of times over the years. Luigi's Mansion has always been a comfort game for me. I'll do more than one playthrough a year sometimes. Any game about a dark and spooky haunted mansion is already going to be something I'll be into. I never even played this game as a kid. I can't explain it. Something about this game in particular just does it for me. Luigi's Mansion 2 was kinda dooky, and completely abandoned the more open structure of the first one in favor of something more mission-based. And I refused to buy a Nintendo Switch, so I never ended up playing 3. I'd also rather chew glass than buy a Switch 2, or Mario Kart for $80 goddamn dollars, but I digress. If I continue to do this year-end wrap-up thing as the years go on, I all but guarantee this game is going to be on every list. It wasn't on last year's list, but that isn't because I didn't play it, but because I forgot to include it. Have I mentioned Nintendo sucks nowadays? Because they do. For some reason, I found this game very difficult to write a short summary of. You're already familiar with Death Stranding, I'm sure, and the core gameplay loop involves delivering packages like a post-apocalyptic Amazon driver. It's a very strange game, the kind of thing that only Hideo Kojima could come up with. I'm not the type to weep with joy every time he does something. Yeah, this is real. And it's stupid. But I still find myself kind of fascinated by this game. It's the kind of thing that really couldn't be made at any other time in gaming history. It was a little long though. The ending hour or two is spent on these incredibly long cutscenes that explain the story in great detail, despite everything covered in them being things even the passively observant player would already have been able to put together. Other than that, I had a great time with it. I haven't played Death Stranding 2 yet, but it'll happen one day soon. If anything, because I'm curious where the gameplay could even go from where the first one left off.
すぐに戻るから。本当にすぐに戻るから。待ってて、少しだけ。
お兄ちゃん、また私を置いていくの。
I was a little bit vague about Maiden of Blackwater because I knew I was going to be talking about this one later on. This game rules. Fatal Frame 2 is the culmination of a generation of survival horror game design. The environments take full advantage of everything the PS2 was capable of, which made for an experience entirely unique from the likes of Resident Evil or Silent Hill. The game is mostly fixed camera, like Resident Evil, but given the mechanic of switching to first person to take pictures, nothing is pre-rendered, which means the camera can move dynamically at certain points. Sometimes your view will be partially obscured by objects in the foreground, intentionally, giving the impression that you're being watched from the rooftops or under the floorboards. The story is top tier as well. It's set in an isolated mountain village that became an urban legend for vanishing off the face of the earth. It appears out of the fog while the two protagonists are walking in the woods and doesn't allow them to leave. The details of the story aren't really spelled out as clearly as you might think. Instead, they rely on the player to put the pieces together themselves. Everything serves to present the story in a way that doesn't get in the way of the actual gameplay. Rarely, if ever, does it stop you for minutes-long expository dialogue. It nails the sound design too. The music is some of the spookiest in the business, from more melodic tracks to some Yamaoka-esque noise. If I had one complaint, it would be that the ending sections are a little too combat heavy. There's more than one point where you're just trying to get from one place to another and you're stopped every 2 minutes by a combat encounter that isn't really difficult enough to add to the tension and just kind of serves as a minor inconvenience. That and there are a couple of enemy encounters that are reused just a few too many times. The hide-and-seek child ghosts, for instance, which are a little bit of a pain. You'll hear, and you'll just immediately deflate. But in the face of such an overwhelming triumph in creating a tense atmosphere, a deep and satisfying narrative, and classic survival horror gameplay with a few new twists, any complaints I have about Fatal Frame 2 mean absolutely nothing. And not too long after I rolled credits on this game, a remake was announced, which of course I will be playing day one. You better believe it. I will take time off of work, I will turn my phone off, I will ignore all responsibilities when it comes out. I would love to go on for another hour about this game, but I'll stop here, or else this video will be about 40% Fatal Frame 2 glazing. TLDR, play this game. This is another one I talked about last year. I played it co-op with a friend. Only this time we 100%ed it, getting every achievement and the max rank possible. There was a lot more to this game than we thought, actually. Turns out we missed a whole lot of the optional bosses and all but 2 of the in-game weapons. It was a good time. Looking forward to Grounded 2 when it's playable, because right now it's kind of a mess. But the first one is worth a look. Despite kind of looking just like a generic survival game, there is quite a bit more to it, I would say. I'm not sure what possessed me to replay this game after so many years. This was one of the 5 games I owned on the PlayStation 1 when I was a kid, alongside such classics as Final Fantasy VIII, Oddworld, and PlayStation Magazine Demo Disc 17. I haven't played or even seen gameplay of this game since my childhood, so it was quite the nostalgia trip. It's made by Neversoft, may they rest in peace. It held up better than I expected, but it is quite short. I finished it in probably 3 hours. Playing the PS1 game naturally led me to the other Spider-Man game I owned as a kid, the movie adaptation. Yeah, remember when Blockbuster movies all came with video game adaptations? Boy, those were the days. The Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies fared quite a bit better than most. I dare say this game is actually quite good. There's even a couple of stealth missions that were, honestly, some of the most enjoyable parts of the game. And they do it without making you play as Mary Jane. Who knew that was possible? Not really a game that you can finish, but we did play every mission plus the DLCs. I say we because this is another game that I played co-op with 2 friends. And man, this game is tense. It's a slower-paced tactical shooter in the vein of SWAT 4, where the goal is, ideally, to not have to use your weapon at all. In fact, going for max rank on every mission pretty much requires you to go non-lethal almost completely. And it made for some great moments. One of those times where you really can't just talk and joke and goof off the entire time. You have to be pure business and communicate concisely and quickly. It's a really great experience if you have a good team. BioShock is another one of those games that I play through every 2 or 3 years, and every time I do, I gain a little bit more of an appreciation for it. To me, this is one of those games that should be required reading. If you're serious about gaming as a hobby or as an art form, you owe it to yourself to play BioShock at least once. Most of you probably already know about it, but in case you don't, consider this your call to action. It's dirt cheap and goes on sale frequently. Thank me later. So there's a lot to say about Call of Duty, especially right now. Historically, I've been on the Call of Duty is good actually train, which sadly makes the last 3 Call of Duties being complete ass cheeks all the more tragic and make me look all the more stupid. But I digress. I've really been reckoning with my love of Call of Duty lately. Every successive entry since Modern Warfare 2019 gets dumber, less consumer-friendly, more toxic, less fun to play, and now they're using shitty-ass AI assets. And just by seeing gameplay of Call of Duty's Black Ops 7's campaign, you know that's not going to be on this year's list. Anyway, I guess Call of Duty 4 is Call of Duty 4. It's a great game, but there really isn't anything I can say about it someone hasn't already said. Crow Country is a game that I had my eye on from its announcement. It's an old-school survival horror in the vein of Resident Evil, but with an art style reminiscent of Final Fantasy VII. You wander through an abandonment... God, why can't I say this? You wander through an abandoned amusement park full of puzzles and unholy creatures. And it's pretty good. It's the perfect length, too. It took me about 4 hours and change to complete, so it's not a huge commitment. There's secrets to find, optional bosses, all that good stuff. It's $20 and I felt like I got my money's worth. It's nice to see some survival horror games still being made that aren't just streamer bait and actually manage to get the vibe right. I have some nitpicks, of course. As you progress, there start to be some traps scattered around the park, and I swear, these are there just to annoy you and waste your healing items. I don't know how many I felt like I just couldn't avoid unless I already knew they were there. But again, these are just nitpicks. I still had a really good time with this game. Trends in gaming come and go every few years, and they're rarely anything I'm terribly interested in. This recent trend, though, of goofy co-op games that heavily rely on proximity chat and communication is one I have absolutely been here for. Peak is one of the standouts in my opinion. The only goal is to make it to the top of a winding, elaborate mountain alive. There are items to find and hazards to overcome, shenanigans to be had. I didn't spend a lot of time on it, but I have completed enough runs that I feel like I can call it done. Although the game is still receiving updates that keep me coming back every so often. Resident Evil is a game that I had only previously dabbled in. I've enjoyed the Resident Evil series for a long time now, but I never did play the original PlayStation 1 trilogy. The main reason being that I more or less assumed the inventory management, tank controls, and wonky combat would bog down the experience a little too much to make a full playthrough worth the effort. But that was dumb, because this game is a masterpiece by any standard. I quickly forgot about any mechanical hang-ups I had, and was completely immersed in the game as if it came out yesterday. Its greatest strength was in its more subtle design philosophy. It feels more like an adventure game with zombies than an action game with a few puzzles. The limitation of early 3D game design I assumed would hold it back ended up being what I liked about it the most. The best Castlevania game, don't at me. I know there will be cries of Symphony of the Night from the audience, if there was one, but for my money, when I think Castlevania, I think Super Castlevania 4. The music is generationally great, the gameplay is smooth and responsive, it's just a great time all around. It's not my first playthrough, and it will not be the last. Unless I
Keel over and die.
Most of my comments about Resident Evil 1 can also be applied to 2. It's a very solid follow-up that resembles the survival horror we know today, just a little bit more. There's more action, ammo is more plentiful, it's just a bigger scale in general. I played both the Leon A and Claire B scenarios as intended. They differ in some pretty significant ways, so it's very much worth it and doesn't really feel like padding. It's a good time. I really don't have a lot of bad things to say about it. It's an overall very polished version of Resident Evil 1, but I do lament the lack of that adventure game feel the first game had, but minor nitpick. Alright, so this was one of the games I wanted to talk about the most. The first new Silent Hill game in over a decade, if you don't count the remake of Silent Hill 2. Yeah, the short message exists too, but who cares? Silent Hill F is developed by Neobards Entertainment, which is a developer with very little under its belt. And what it does have is not very impressive. But at the very least, I knew that even if the gameplay wasn't great, I would enjoy the story at least. Because
That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
The story was written by the Japanese writer that goes by the pen name Ryukishi07. He wrote what is objectively the greatest visual novel ever goddamn written, Higurashi When They Cry, which I talked about last year because it's life-changingly good. It's another subject I debated making an entire video about, but getting back to Silent Hill F. An unproven studio making a game based on an IP that has fallen from grace and become more of a niche thing among hardcore horror game enthusiasts as opposed to the powerhouse it used to be. It had every reason not to be good. But it was. Oh, it was. This was my game of the year. Silent Hill has always been a huge favorite of mine, and Silent Hill F delivers on every promise that the series has ever made. It is very combat heavy, but every encounter remains a series of meaningful decisions. Every enemy you kill depletes your resources in some way, be it your health items or your weapon's durability. This game is set in 1960s Japan. You're not going to be blowing monsters away with a shotgun. Most of the time, all you've got is a baseball bat or a steel pipe, which will eventually break. Normally, weapon durability is something I would complain about in Breath of the Wild, but it's balanced quite well here. Again, it's more about the decision to avoid combat and save your resources, or to spend them eliminating a threat in an area you're going to be exploring for a while. The atmosphere of Silent Hill is pitch perfect, despite not actually being set in the town of Silent Hill proper. There's plenty of puzzles to solve too, with separate difficulty settings for puzzles and combat respectively, as is series tradition. There are a few puzzles that didn't quite land for me and had me guessing until I stumbled onto the answer, but those were the exception. And story-wise, my god, there's just so much to unpack. I won't be spoiling anything about it, but I will say it did not disappoint me. There are many different endings, as is also a series tradition. The first ending you're likely to reach will change the context of the story and beg multiple playthroughs, with both new and slightly different cutscenes for a second run on New Game Plus. Replay value is extremely strong as a result. It's just brilliant in every aspect. I really don't believe in assigning ratings to a piece of art, but if I were to, Silent Hill F would be a 10 out of 10. No game is flawless, of course. I do have nitpicks. There are a few sections that were fairly weak and left me a little lukewarm or frustrated, so maybe it's a 9.5, but in all, they really just don't mean much to me when looking at the big picture. Another short game by David Szymanski. I was curious about it since Butcher's Creek had some references to it. It's very atmospheric and showcases Szymanski's unique ability to create a very thick atmosphere and an intriguing narrative with very little effort. It's very basic, but very stylish. There were a couple of Nancy Drew games on last year's list. They're kind of a nostalgia thing for me since I played them with my sister growing up. Most of them are solid point-and-click adventure games, but this one kinda sucks. A lot of it is kind of solve half a puzzle, go and talk to someone, and then solving the other half. Do you know Latin? Well, if you don't, go talk to the freaking bird and do a cooking minigame. Need batteries for your flashlight? You're gonna. Go talk to the kid between the hours of 11 a.m. and 6 p.m. and do another tedious minigame. Nancy Drew games typically have minigames like this, but they're usually more about puzzle solving. My issue is mainly that the balance between them is way off. I suggest playing a different one if you're gonna get into these games. You're not, of course, but if you did. I'm not the most dedicated player of JRPGs, but I always love me some Persona. Although I have not played the original Persona 3, and going into the remake, I knew basically nothing. But good God was this game incredible. Some of the most well-realized and likable characters I have ever seen in a game. Flashy and stylish turn-based combat, and that soundtrack. Oh my god, man, just listen to this.
Disturbing the peace, look into my eyes. Now tell me the things you were laughing about behind my back. The tenacity, I hold this heart to break down. It's late for apologies, it's going down.
If that wasn't enough, it may be the most engrossing story of the series thus far. If you're not familiar with Persona, it's kind of half visual novel, half turn-based RPG. You spend a lot of time developing a bond with characters both in and outside of your party. Each character's story deals with the game's central theme somehow. The loss of a parent, a sibling, a child, even the loss of one's own life. And you may draw the conclusion that Persona 3 is a depressing and dour game as a result. But somehow it isn't, because it's just as much about life and hope as it is about death and loss. It was an incredible ride and an emotional roller coaster like every Persona game is. Capping off the PS1 Resident Evil trilogy with Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, probably the least talked about in the main numbered entries. I have a lot of mixed feelings about it. On one hand, it's the kind of Majora's Mask of Resident Evil. It was made very quickly and reuses a lot of assets from Resident Evil 2. There's even a section that takes you to the Raccoon City police station. It's very action heavy compared to 1 and 2, which is part of what I don't like. Resident Evil's tank controls really do not lend well for more action-focused gameplay. The new dodge mechanic helps ease the burden a little, but I could not for the life of me get it to trigger on command, and ended up just dodging accidentally most of the time. But there's a lot here to like on the other hand. Namely, the Nemesis himself and the game's increased replay value. Since there are a handful of choices to make that affect the outcome of the game, the Nemesis fights are a huge pain in the ass if you're not prepared for them, but if you know what you're doing, they can really be the highlights of the game. Nothing pleases me more than the fact that people are still making high-quality, high-effort mods for Half-Life 27 years after its release. I never get tired of Half-Life or its mods, so I dove straight in as soon as I heard about this. And let me tell you, this is one of the good ones, with some caveats, but first the positives. Half-Life Insecure understands the original game's level design and enemy roster more completely than most mods I've played. It brings in some of opposing forces, enemies, and weapons, making it quite robust in terms of variety. It's also fairly long. I don't remember how long it took me, but it's certainly longer than Blue Shift. And man, does the combat ramp way up towards the halfway point. If you thought vanilla Half-Life was too easy, this'll give you a run for your money. So what are the caveats I mentioned? Well, there's one big one. The game uses AI voices, and they sound consistently god-awful.
The only way to get out of this place is finding somebody with proper scanner access, someone that can open the front gate. However, that door up ahead seems to have been sealed up tight.
I would much rather have the wooden voice acting of something like Nightmare House. It's just horrendous in every way possible. There are times where lines from the original game are used right next to the new AI voices, and the contrast in quality is so stark and obvious that it really puts a sharp focus on it. The only other complaint I have really is that the obligatory Zen section is just balls, with puzzles that sometimes work and sometimes don't. Souped up versions of Vortigaunts are also introduced that have no wind-up or cooldown to their long-range lightning attacks, so they're just taking huge chunks of your health out with no reprisal. Still, I highly recommend it if you're like me and always up for more Half-Life. Another classic from the Xbox 360 heyday that was long overdue for a revisit. It just recently received new DLC after many years, one that allows you to create and download custom characters. So naturally, the first thing I did was check to see if someone had made Rika Furude or Rena Ryugu, and I was not disappointed. Castle Crashers is always a fun time. Shutting your brain off and playing a mindless beat-em-up every now and then is a requirement for good mental health. What do I even say about Abiotic Factor? It's a survival game, but you always have a clear objective, although with not a whole lot to go on in terms of how you're supposed to accomplish it, leading to a lot of moments where you have to explore and think creatively. It also doesn't randomly generate a world and resources. Everything in the environment is handcrafted with intention and progression in mind. Even enemy placement and NPCs are all baked in, so there isn't that element of randomness that most survival games bank off of. It intentionally evokes Half-Life's setting of Black Mesa. It begins in a research facility where something has very obviously gone wrong, and you start by cobbling together improvised weapons and armor out of office supplies. It can be played solo, but I elected to play it with a friend. It also uses proximity chat in some fun ways. Eventually you get a radio you have to equip and actively use to speak and to hear your teammates at long distances. It's also no joke in terms of difficulty, it really doesn't mess around. There's also, of course, as I said, the survival mechanics. Not only are you required to eat, drink, and sleep, but you also need to manage your bowel movements. Never before have I played a game that had me running around desperately looking for a bathroom, and I was not always successful.
Oh, boy! Yeah!
You already know Resident Evil 4 is one of the greatest games ever made, and the intervening 20 years has not changed that fact at all. But the VR version for the headset formerly known as the Oculus Quest 2 really tips it over the edge. This is the best VR game I've ever played. Every aspect of Resident Evil 4 has been updated for first-person VR. It allows you to intuitively do things that wouldn't be possible in any other game. You can shoot something out of a tree with one hand and catch it in the other. You can dual wield any two weapons. You have to physically reload every time, which never gets old. It's not always easy to do under pressure either. When there's 5 or 10 enemies running at you and you're struggling with the bolt of your rifle, it's seriously intense. The fact that this is exclusive to the MetaQuest 2 is absolutely tragic. I wish everyone could get their hands on this game. The Resident Evil remake was my first experience with Resident Evil 1, but I never actually finished it until this year. Having finally played the original PS1 trilogy, I thought it was only appropriate to play the once GameCube exclusive remake. It adds a few new gameplay tweaks, an option to use a more modern control scheme, some level design tweaks, and of course the much discussed Crimson Heads, which add a huge heap of tension to an already very stressful game. And I've gotta say, it looks gorgeous for what is ostensibly a GameCube game. Although I played it on PC at a higher resolution than the GameCube could have managed. A lot of my thoughts are the same as the original Resident Evil, but this version holds up even better. A lot of people really don't like Resident Evil 5 for what it did to the series, and what it did to horror games for a while. But having come out the other side of it, with Resident Evil 7 and 8 being as good as they are, I can more safely say, I always liked this game. A lot. At its core, it's Resident Evil 4, but in co-op. You can't seriously tell me that that doesn't sound awesome. And it is! I had a blast with this game when it came out, and I had a blast with it when I replayed it this year. There are some stupid ass sequences towards the end, like the part with the spinning elevator that made me want to vomit, but I just really like Resident Evil 5. I also played the 2 DLC chapters, Lost in Nightmares and Desperate Escape, for the first time. Lost in Nightmares is more of a callback to the original Resident Evil, taking place in the Spencer Mansion, although it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the wider timeline of Resident Evil, but that doesn't really matter. Because there's a part where one player has to complete a very difficult QuickTime event, while the other player, definitely not me, makes it as difficult as possible. X, B...
Fuck off!
Thanks. Wait!
Desperate Escape isn't really worth talking about, though. It's a roughly 30 to 45 minute combat gauntlet that only really exists to explain how Jill and that other guy showed up with a helicopter to save the day at the end of the game. If you haven't played Resident Evil 5 in a while, grab a friend and give it a go. You may find it's better than you remember. My personal favorite from all of From Software's Souls-like pantheon, Bloodborne's fights are relentlessly fast-paced and pretty much require you to take an aggressive playstyle, which is why I enjoy it so much, since that's typically how I play these games. I've played it through many times before and will play it many times more. There are still boss fights though that kick my ass 17 different ways, but I always keep coming back to it every few years. And for God's sakes, why is it stuck at 30 frames per second on PS4? Just put a patch out or something. Just a patch. Just give me a patch. Daddy, please. Please. Oh. It is possible to play it at a higher resolution and frame rate via a PS4 emulator, but there are some missing effects and it crashed on me a few times, so I ended up just going back to the PS4 version, which is better than nothing, but still, come on. 60 frames, I beg of you. Being a hardcore Assassin's Creed enthusiast has been interesting, to say the least. I had the unfortunate realization that the series has been going downhill for longer than it was at its peak. I had the itch to play one of them again, as I do once or twice a year, and I had a second realization. I never fully played Freedom Cry. Freedom Cry is technically a DLC for Black Flag, but it was later released as a standalone game, so I figured why not. And yeah, I'm a little confused as to why this was a standalone game. It's very short. I finished it in less than 4 hours without rushing. I nearly 100%ed it accidentally, which for an Assassin's Creed is really saying something. It has Adewale, who you may remember as the quartermaster of the Jackdaw in Assassin's Creed 4, as the playable character, who's a great character, fully deserving of his time center stage, but he just isn't given many interesting things to do. The story doesn't really go anywhere or seem to have any real purpose. In summary, Adewale is shipwrecked, asks for help from some lady who turns out is working for the governor. Adewale says, "Hey, I don't think you should be working with this guy. He seems untrustworthy to me and will probably betray you when it suits him." And the woman says, "You're wrong." Then Adewale spends 2 years freeing slaves, which doesn't drive the plot further really at all. And then once you've spent enough time doing that, it turns out Adewale was right, and the governor gets a ton of slaves killed. Then Adewale kills the governor for what he did. The end. No lessons were learned, no character growth happens. It doesn't add greater context to anything that happens in another entry later or prior, nor does it really have anything to do with the events of Black Flag, outside of the occasional reference to Edward Kenway. It only exists for the people who finished Black Flag and thought, "Man, I wish this game was 3 hours and 45 minutes longer." If you're a serious completionist, it's worth playing, but if not, I'd say it's a pretty safe skip.
So yeah, you're gay.
Ooh, boy, that was a long one. That's what she said. A lot of games I finished this year. And that's it. I finally got this video done at 10:51 p.m. on December 31st, while fireworks are going on in the background, terrifying my cat and keeping me from sleeping. So, I want to take this opportunity to say thank you for watching, or for listening in the background while you do other things. Before I go, a quick shout out to a couple of games that I played a absolute crap ton of, but didn't finish because they can't actually technically be finished. And those games are Hunt Showdown, Deep Rock Galactic, Played-Up, and Valheim. All of which I could really talk about for about as long as I talked about all of these other games. But this video is already getting too long, so that's all. Thank you for watching. See you next time.